Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people who I've connected with over the years in the world of arts and entertainment. And today I'm very pleased to have with me iconic Canadian rock star Rik Emmett. Welcome to the show, Rik.
Thank you, Tommy.
Not only are you a rock star, but now you're also an author. So we're going to talk today about your brand new book, Lay It on the Line. And this is a backstage pass to rock star adventure, conflict, and triumph. Imagine that. There we go.
Is that mirrored? No. Well,
No,
let's
that
hope
looks perfectly normal. So I
Wait, I
mysteries
have.
of technology. So I know that you've had a long and illustrious career in the business, and this is quite an entertaining read. Um, I'm curious, after all these years, what finally inspired you to write it all down?
Oh, there were a lot of reasons. I've turned 70, so that, getting older, I think that's often a spur for people in their lives when you've been in show business and around you, everybody's going, "Hey, when are you going to write your memoir? Right? Well, you should put that in a memoir, all that kind of stuff." Uh, we'd also Triumph had done a documentary, and in the wake of it, I thought, well, that's the story of Triumph, but it's not necessarily my story. I think I'd like to try and sort of talk about all of the things I did in my life before I joined Triumph, and then all of the things I did after I left it. Um, so, those were things that sort of pushed me as well.
Well, it's interesting. It's similar in a way, and I know you talk about the Beatles being an inspiration, and I mean, imagine that. If you, I'm sure you can see the instruments behind me here. We all of a certain age share that inspiration, and don't tell me that there wasn't some sort of a hypno beam being aimed at us from the Ed Sullivan Show. That said, the Beatles were together for 13 years, so was Triumph. But there's an awful lot more to your story, as you say, than just Triumph. And I'm interested in knowing that you grew up not with a silver spoon. You were like average kids, of the day, and you came about the music honestly. Now, I know you were brought up going to Sunday school, and that's quite the contrast to somebody who's lived the rock and roll lifestyle. Although one of the things that you say in your book is you were never in it for the sex and drugs. It was all about the
No,
music.
yeah, and the stuff about church. I mean, I am not religious, and but when I was a kid and my mom would take me, I would sing in the choir, and the whole thing of music, I think, was really the strongest thing that was an influence. Sang in the choirs, then sang in school choirs, and sang in citywide choirs, and so my singing was really the thing that led me into music. And obviously, as you mentioned, the Beatles, the whole thing about guitar was something that just, like was a, as you say, hypno beam. I like that. There was happened there, and the thing too is that the kind of work ethic that the Beatles had, in the sense that, there they were out on the road touring, and then they couldn't even hear themselves think anymore. They got to the point where they go, well, we should just go into the studio and try to make great records, and let's become a recording act and recording artists in the true sense of that word. And I think that ended up being a huge thing, that it wasn't just the Beatles. There was also the technology was exploding. The whole thing of the transition from AM radio and singles to FM radio and albums, and there was a kind of a conscientiousness that existed that, I mean, I was just buying into that huge, so and then once it's got its teeth in you, now there's another thing that I mentioned in the memoir, and this is kind of answering both questions at once. The first one that you asked about, why, when I first picked up a guitar, I wanted to play like McCartney. I wanted to play, with in a left-handed way. And I went to see a teacher, a guy named Jack Carson, on my first few lessons. And he was a left-handed guy who played right-handed. And he said, well, you should learn. He turned it around and he said, you're going to learn this way. And I went, oh, no, that feels weird. He said, look, just trust me. Your strong hand is going to be on the fretboard. And so I have this thing, it's called cross dominance, dextro-sinistral. My left hand does gross motor control. My right hand does, writing and eating with a fork. And so fine motor control, this hand. And that I think it's only 1% of the general population. 10% are left-handed. 1% of the 10% are cross-dominant. But I think if you, and I don't think any survey's ever been done, but I think if you did do a survey of professional guitar players that end up having careers, I think it's going to be more like 25% of them or 30% of them are cross-dominant players. It's just like you play the guitar and it goes like yeah, I really like you. And you go, I really like you. And so this thing starts, and like the list is long. I think Steve Morse, Eddie Van Halen, Waddy Wachtel, you can just go along this list. The guy in the Smashing Pumpkins, Corgan. Like, there's so many guys that Paul Simon, left-handed guys that play guitar in a right-handed way. So, I think I fall into that group. And that's very illustrious company for me.
Sure is.
Me to
Now,
put myself.
I'm curious, and I wasn't aware of how many of these cross-dominant players there were. I mean, I recognize all the names, obviously, but I'm curious how much of that was because back in the day, when you were in school, for example, the teachers would force kids to write with the right hand if they were naturally left-handed. I wonder how
Yeah,
much of a factor that was.
yeah, I'm sure that it was, but the weird thing is that nobody really forced me. These were choices that I kind of just made on my own. The writing with my right hand, I never felt like, oh, I want to write with my left. Now I have a daughter that's completely left-handed, does everything with her left hand. But I had this cross dominance where it was like, no, if I'm going to hammer a nail, I'm going to do it with my left hand, or if I'm going to kick a soccer ball, I do it with my left foot. And of course, I played soccer. They teach you got to use both feet. My right foot was never my natural one, but my right hand was always the natural one for, picking up a fork and stuffing my mouth.
Yeah, it's good to have a natural way to eat. Oh man, I've learned a fair bit from your memoir, and one of the things that I don't think I was aware of is that Triumph actually started out as a Led Zeppelin tribute. I mean, I get, you've got that high tenor range and everything, but that was interesting for me.
Yeah, and it was really our claim to fame. And when we started well, we had a few of them. I mean, Gilmour, the drummer, he wanted to absolutely ensure that we would have, the largest PA, the largest light system, the largest effects, the largest truck, when we were playing little bars. So there was that. We did have that calling card. But the Led Zeppelin thing was I could do it. I could play the Jimmy Page stuff and sing the Plant stuff. So that we would end up doing like whole sets of it, like medleys of it, and just come out like a freight train, and there would be no stops between the songs. We would just roll through a 30 or a 40-minute set of nothing but Led Zeppelin. And yeah, those were the days. Yeah, yeah, and of course, the hunger for that band that existed was huge. And in Canada, the way the bar system was, the scene was very much, you couldn't really play original music. They wanted covers. That's what, and you could make good money if you were a cover band. So on the local scene, there were bands that played like a lot of Beatles stuff, Stones, that kind of thing. There weren't bands that could do Zeppelin because it was hard to find a singer that could cut it. I think probably Rush was a bar band on the Canadian scene that they did a little of that, but they never really did Rush. When I went and saw them in their early days when they had John Rutsey as their drummer, they did like Jeff Beck going down, like the stuff that had Rod Stewart as the vocalist, and I think Geddy, I think he really liked singing Small Faces, that kind of stuff. He didn't really model himself after Plant, although clearly, as careers develop, then you sort of get put into the same category, especially Geddy and I being Canadian and singing high, but there, Plant and later on in my career, Steve Perry of Journey and the guy from Foreigner whose name is escaping me at the
Lou
moment.
Graham.
Lou Graham, thank you. Yeah. So I mean, those guys were tremendous singers. So it was kind of nice to be lumped into a category like that. Even if what the way it would sometimes happen is Rolling Stone would go, yeah, yeah, we don't like any of these guys. They would make a list of all of these guys. I go, well, it's a nice list to be in, but apparently they don't like any of us. So
Oh man. You know, what comes to mind for me is that back in the day, playing in the bars, with smoking, kudos to you guys that could hit those notes in that smoke-filled room. I mean, I used to complain about the uh pots, flash pots, and I felt like
oh,
that was drying me out. And I mean, I never tried to hit those notes until many, many years later after they stopped smoking in the bars. So kudos for being able to do that.
well, you're young and you're foolish, and I mean that never even really crossed my mind at the time. Although I can remember, we would play 6 nights a week in bars even before I joined Triumph, and then my amp would be home on Sunday night, and we lived in a small house. I would have to store it in my own bedroom, and the smell of tobacco coming off of the tubes, and then if you were, decided to turn it on and practice, plug it in, like the tubes would warm up, and then oh man, the room would the Tolex of the cabinet and the tubes warming up would make it smell like, sort of like stale beer, piss, and cigarettes. Like
Oh
wow.
God, nothing like
Now,
recycled secondhand smoke. Yeah. Oh
oh,
boy.
and it was grotesque. You're absolutely right. But in Triumph's case, I mean, we would blow off so many flash pots that, like, I would uh, get up the next day and have a shower in the morning and, like, clearing out my sinuses and the magnesium powder that would be inside. And I thought, I'm going to kill myself here. Like, this will give me cancer. Like, but it was the way that things were. You didn't really kind of think of it as, you know I mean, here we are now in the age of post COVID, where we were all wearing masks, and you go, yeah, I guess I should have had some kind of a filter on all those years.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, Speaking of your voice and singing, I've watched some recent videos where you talk about now you're 70 and you can't hit those notes anymore. But at the same time, as I was doing some random research ahead of this call, I've looked at quite a few video clips on YouTube and so on. And there is a woman who has this YouTube channel, vocalist, and she was focused on a few of your songs. How is he doing this? And I watched her analyze your singing "Fight the Good Fight." And it's not like you didn't have any technique or don't have any technique, and I wonder, did you ever take voice lessons, or did I miss that in the book?
No, I never took vocal coaching per se. Not, I mean, I sang in choir when I was a kid. I mean, from the age of about 7 until I was about, I would say, 12, 13. When I went to high school, I started playing violin in the orchestra instead of singing in the choir. But so I mean, obviously, I'd been exposed to certain things. Yeah, the way my throat is, just naturally the way my voice is. I wish I could sing like John Anderson of Yes. He was one of my favorite vocalists, and I don't have that purity, and I don't have that pure a high range. But I was a first soprano all the way through it, like a boy soprano, because that was the voice that I had. And the thing about sort of having chest tone and then being able to have head tone, there's a thing that I can do with my throat where I can narrow it and I can hit really, really high notes. And I mean, even guys like Steve Perry, we did a bunch of shows where we opened for them, and he and I had a conversation one day, and he was saying, like, how do you hit those really high ones? Like, his high note would be maybe a B in his range, and I could quite easily hit E's a fourth above that. And sometimes I would even have, like, Never Surrender. I would sing an F sharp, which was a step above the E, and I would do it every night. And I could do it even if I had a sore, tired throat. I could hit those notes. Now I can't anymore. you know, um, there's a way that you can accomplish this with a technique. Ian Gillan used to be able to sing. I'm just talking about E's and F sharps. He could sing high A's And they used to do a song called Child in Time, and I used to do it in bars when I was before Triumph. And the notes are like A-G-E, A-G-E, but like
Yeah.
a couple off. And I don't know how he does it. It's like it's an ability to kind of go to this falsetto thing, but it's still a kind of a head. You can still rip it, And Sammy Hagar can still do it. Like I don't know how he can, but he still has the ability to rip some of those high notes.
Well,
Mine are gone.
I
Even my
also I
falsetto.
also do a series about singing where we talk about technique and so on. And I think that a big part of it is a combination of confidence and relaxation. Because I know that when I started going out on my own without a band, and I was doing a lot of weird stuff that I hadn't done before, some of the higher Rod Stewart stuff and Bonnie Tyler and stuff like It's a Heartache for me, to sing. And I just found that once I was relaxed and in the zone, I could almost sing anything, you know?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think there's a truth that you have about the way things work when you're in your 20s and then your 30s and then and truth starts to change. And by the time I got into my sort of late 50s, 60s, uh, certain kinds of things like there's a place, people talk about the break in your range where you're going from a chest tone and you're going into falsetto. And that became a real difficult thing for me. There were notes there where I didn't have the chops. I didn't have the vocal cords and the ability to tighten them. That's what I think it is. That you lose the elasticity of your vocal cords as you age, just as you lose it everywhere else, and just don't have the ability to narrow the pipes to squeeze out those notes. And in fact, there are some notes now where I go to sing them and it's just air. There's no actual vibration of vocal cords. I can't find the note anymore in my throat because it's just the way things go. And there's very few people that if you went to the local retirement home and you said okay, and you played a note on the piano and said hit this, like people can't do it. It's a fact of life. So they're like opera singers get to a certain point and then they go, yeah, gonna have to retire. It's like ballerinas, that you have a certain time and then you get to a certain age and it's like, well, I guess I got to become a choreographer now.
Or make some adjustments. Yeah, I know a lot of people have lowered the tunings and dropped the keys and so on. And I mean, you do what you have to do. Back to the book for a minute. You claim in there that you are not a nuts and bolts or mathematical or scientific thinker, that you're just an organic thinker. I find you to be very analytical and deep in your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate that. And I would like to think that, the way the brain subdivides itself into hemispheres of left and right, and, there's certain areas, and, brain research is ongoing. Obviously, that we don't know very much at all. But I think there are things that are sort of, traditionally thought of as, like my maths and chemistries and physics, and, they're on one side. And then, the artsy fartsy guy that's a language kind of guy, which is to say the writing of words, the organizing of ideas. That, yes. And what you're talking about, I've had a lot of folks come, I was out to dinner with some friends the other night, and one of my pals that I've known since high school said, Rick, I finally got through your book. Man, you sure are a teacher. Like there's a lot of teaching in your book. And I go, yes, it's what kind of comes natural to me. And it's kind of the way my brain works. That and my wife would often say, Rick, you don't have to describe how to do it three ways. One way will do. I don't. And I go, yeah, but if I don't do it from three ways, I'm not triangulating the idea and corralling the idea in a way that I'm making it so that everyone can understand it. She goes, yeah, well, give us a little credit. I go, nope, don't want to give you any credit. want to absolutely hammer you with my, my point until, I've made it from every direction. And I get it. I had, when I was teaching at the college, I had other colleagues on the faculty that would say, "Oh, Rik, man, you're so pedantic," like, but in a good way. Yeah, all right. It's true, and but I do think of it more as a language thing. Like in the final analysis, it's like when I'm writing poetry, I will go into the thesaurus and I will try to find, I don't want a word that's just in the ballpark. I want the exact one to say exactly what I want, and on a page of prose, if I've already used that word, I don't want to use it again. And now I have this thing about I've got to find a synonym. I can't use the same word twice. That will be, bad writing. So, I make up these own rules in my own head, and it probably does get a little too much for some folks, but um, I don't know. I mean, I figured I was only ever going to write one memoir, and I was going to just try to make sure that I got it covered from every angle.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about your love for teaching. Um, when I was in, I think my very first bar band, there was an older guitar player who came out to see us, and he said, you've got some real potential. And he suggested to me that I start buying Guitar Player magazine. And one of the first things that really caught my attention is that you had a column in there. And I thought, wow, I've seen them in concert. This is great. Now I can learn how to play like Rik Emmett. You know, not that I ever accomplished that. So, thanks for the giving me the aspiration. But there's so many things I think that go into your talent and your technique. And you are a very schooled and very educated and very precise in your approach. So, thanks for all the lessons.
You're welcome. I do think you're pointing something like that. I'm working on a new project now called 10 Telecaster Tales, and I'm writing a book about the writing of the music. And in it, I admit quite freely, I hasten to admit that I can't play at a level of guys like Pat Metheny, Bill Frisell, Julian Lage. Like I find them inspiring, but I can't get there. Like it's not the kind of player that I am. I don't have that kind of intellect. I don't have that kind of jazz vocabulary. In my own way, I do what I can do the best that I can. And now, when you're talking about writing columns for guitar magazines, I honestly think that I got that gig because of being articulate. I don't think I got it because I was necessarily this incredibly schooled guitar player. I was a self-taught kind of guy. I was always more of a singer-songwriter guitarist, and in sort of in that order early in my life, and then I became a songwriter, singer, guitarist, and I think of them in that order. Songwriting and singing always came first in the way I perceive, like looking in the mirror. How do I perceive myself? Guitar was always kind of the last thing. And I was never the kind of guy that was going to go, okay, I'm going to learn to play, modes in every position, and in every key, and I'm just going to add that to my arsenal. Well, I never did. Could I write in Guitar Player magazine in a column, hey, this is something you should do? Yes, I could, because I knew that was what you should do if you wanted to become like a jazz guy. You needed to know how to blow like that. But was I going to bother? I go, nope. I'm just going to hang with some pentatonics and a little bit of the Dorian and a little bit of the Aeolian, and I can make do. Okay, every now and then I'll throw in a mixo flat 9, flat 13, just because I had a teacher that once said to me in college, well, that scale you're playing, that's a mixo flat 9, flat 13. I go, oh, is it? Thanks. I didn't know that. Because my ears would be the thing that always led me into whatever it was that I was writing myself. It wasn't like I ever, like when I went to Humber College for one semester as a student, there were guys there that could read fly shit, like in terms of sight reading, and there were other guys that could blow over sophisticated changes. Like somebody would put a chart in front of me of like giant steps, at Coltrane's giant steps, and I couldn't blow over that. Like I couldn't, not to save my life, I couldn't. But there were other guys in that program that could, And I went, okay, well, I'm not like those guys.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about all that, and I've had somebody one time say to me that they really liked my modal playing, and I went, "What do you mean?" But anyway, uh,
Yes.
you talk about lyrics and poetry in the book, and I think that goes hand in hand with your melodic sense, because the use of open vowels for long notes, for example, and a consonant that's well placed can really have an emphasis. So I think that the fact that you couldn't just blow over the giant steps, whatever, is part of your musicality, really, your melodic musicality.
Well, I think that's generous of you to say. And, I'd love to believe that it's true. I just think, you know, um, we all have limitations. And even jazz guys have their limitations in ways that, I mean, there would be times where, somebody would come to me after a faculty meeting and say, like, hey, Rik, this thing that you're teaching everybody in your music business class about everybody should have a website. Like, how should I go about this? How do I make a website? How do I put together a marketing plan? And I'm going, okay. It's like, because if you exercise your skills and your aptitude in one direction, probably what you're doing is stealing from another. Like you won't have the time to do everything, And when I was in Triumph, I was in a band where my partners, they were very business oriented. They were very analytical in their business thinking. Gil was excellent with money. Mike was really good with marketing and promotion. There was just a lot of things that I learned, being at the feet of those masters in those disciplines and areas. And most musicians, they don't do that at all. That's not their thing. So the thing that you're pointing out is, again, it goes back to language. I was a writer, and I words and speaking and vocabulary and the sound of words and the poetic nature of rhythms that exist in language. Then I would be trying to put them into my music. And so I think your observation is a good one. It's a strong one. That was the kind of music that I made, as if I was engaging in rhetoric and trying to convince you about something. And I would try to formulate melodies and chord changes as a landscape to generate that kind of feeling. So the marriage of word to melody to chord, that was something that really spoke to me in a way that it wasn't like, no, I just want to blow, man. I go, no, I don't want to just blow. I want to write a script and I want to follow that script because I want my song to be something that speaks in an emotional way, in an intellectual way. I want its meaning to be clear. See, like some folks, I taught songwriting too, and there's some folks, and they like to write songs where the meaning is very, very obscure. They want to make it so that everybody can, you know, and I think I like it. I don't. It's not me. Like that's not the way I like to approach it. And for example, I love Paul Simon as a writer, and I do think that he tends to go, well, I don't mind if it's kind of obscure and people will draw their own conclusions from it, but I think he's also a very poetic kind of guy, and I think he has a side that I go, yeah, that's what I aspire to as well, but that's just an example. I could choose hundreds of them.
Well, my favorite musicians, and especially my favorite guitarists and singers, are those who focus on the melody. For example, da 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 da. That's something that you played that you can hum it, you can sing it. George Harrison's solo from Something. We can all
Yes.
hum that and sing it. And I think that's very important if you're trying to entertain. And yes, there are many artists out there, you mentioned jazz, who aren't really trying to entertain so much as they're trying to be an artist. And they don't necessarily care if they sell records or whatever. But I find that for me, melody is everything, and the crafting of the melody.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you in the sense of, as you're saying, the accessibility of things, the commercial potential of it. McCartney is an example of somebody that instinctively just always had this gift that he was able to exploit in a way that worked. you know, it, it, and that's kind of what an understatement that is. But the other side of it, and when you talk about jazz guys blowing, I think there's an interesting distinction to make here, and that is that music it doesn't always necessarily have to be commercial in order to be entertaining, because um, a guy that's I don't know, playing a tiny club in Manhattan, and he's happy to have the gig, and he gets up on the bandstand and he blows, and he's playing some standards, and he's blowing some crazy things, and he's going places where boldly going where no man has gone before. And there are some people that they love the challenge of that. They find that recreational. It does recreate their spiritual, artistic kind of soul to get exposed to that kind of playing and that kind of music and that kind of thinking. But it's a pretty small percentage. When it comes to, well, I mean, when Triumph first started playing bars, and I would say to people, this is actually a game of how much beer can you sell.
Yeah.
And often with musicians, we would be talking about getting your songs on the radio, melody as you're describing. And I would say, yeah, well, don't forget, getting your songs on the radio, it's about selling advertising time, because that's what radio does. Radio sells airtime. And so they pick music that will satisfy whatever demographic they're trying to sell advertising to. So, if Triumph decides, and we used to have these arguments and debates inside the band. Well, Gil wanted the songs to be really, really heavy rock. I go, yeah, they're not going to get on the radio. Like there's already bands that are already filling that need, and if we're going to, the way we've broken through onto the radio, we need to have melodies that go like that's kind of what radio's going to want from us. And of course, some people don't like to hear that.
No,
Like
there's something for everybody, really.
yeah,
Back to marketing for a minute. You mentioned before we hit record that you've already finished another book.
another couple. Yeah,
And
I have another poet. Like I've done a poetry book, 2021, I guess, reinvention, and poetry books, they sell less than jazz. you know, And then I did my memoir, and ECW Press, my publisher, they were happy to get that because they can sell that. And then maybe some of the poetry books will also sell. But I was also writing. I keep writing poetry from time to time. I keep writing songs from time to time, and I keep writing guitar pieces from time to time. So eventually, these things accumulate to the point where I go, well, I think I've got a book here. So yeah, I've got a book of poetry. It's called Lean Into It or Leaning Into It. I'm not sure which title I'm going to go with, but it's in that ballpark. And who knows when ECW might want to put it out? I don't know. They might go, well, we're thinking 2027, Rick. You know, but I've got this other project where I wrote 10 guitar pieces on a custom made guitar, which is in a Telecaster kind of mold. And then I thought, I want to write stories about these pieces. I want to be, I want language to enter into this. So I started doing that, and then I wrote this book called 10 Telecaster Tales. And I've, giving it to my editor, and he goes, "This is great. We want to put this out maybe next year, like maybe the end of this year." I go, "Okay, great." So the thing about retiring from the road, back when I was in my 60s, uh, and then COVID came along and everybody had to retire from the road. You know, it sort of turned me more into a creative writer, and I realized, well, this is sort of what the final chapter of my life is going to be. It's going to be more about being creative and writing, and I'm starting to have some problems with arthritis in my hands, so I don't know how much I can keep the virtuoso level kind of guitar playing going, because it was a challenge for sure. But the writing of the book, hey, typing on a laptop, I can do that.
Yeah.
So I've I've figured that one out. So I'll probably be doing more and more of that as time goes on.
Well, if there was ever a silver lining around COVID, I think it was the increase in creativity from artists like yourself, and I mean, I started this podcast because of COVID, and it was a matter of I had a career in music and I shared stages with a lot of people and met a lot of people um, over the years. And I thought, you know what? David Henman from April Wine is going to be home if I call him. Ronnie King from the Stampeders is going to be home, and that's how it all went with me, and it's led to a lot of other creative avenues and to meeting people like you on the show. So that's all great. Now there's an album as well, Diamonds.
Yeah.
So that's out, and that is the heavy years.
Well, yes and no. I mean, when I left Triumph, I did 3 albums for a label called Duke Street Records, which was an independent label in Canada that had distribution with MCA Universal at the time. And so when was shopping around my first album that I'd made solo after leaving Triumph, um, there was a lot of deals that got offered, and Duke Street was distributed by the large label that the Triumph had been with, and so it was like, well, it's kind of a no brainer. Okay, we'll make a deal with them. And that first album, I made a deal with Charisma Records in the States, and then they went bankrupt when the record came out. So it was like, okay, well, that's gone right down the toilet. Um, but anyways, I kept making 3 albums for Duke Street, and eventually, over time, they gave my masters back. I said, Andy Herman was the guy that ran the label. He was very kind to me, and I said, hey, can I have those back? And he went, yep, sure. Here's a 2-page agreement. They're yours. So I got them back, and then I went to these merch companies that I knew, and I said, hey, I got this stuff. Do you want to do a compilation? And so, but in my mind, I wanted to do 2 from the 3 albums. I wanted to do one that would be the hard rock kind of stuff, and one that would be more the esoteric, muso, ballady kind of softer stuff. So this first one is coming out, Diamonds. Yeah, the hard rock years. And it's the time period between 1990 and 1995, 96. And yeah, it's great. They're putting it out on vinyl and CD and gatefold things, and you can buy it with pictures and slip mats for vinyl turntables, and I hand wrote out some lyric sheets, and so there's a deluxe kind of version of this for the fans that are you know, willing to work overtime for a couple of weeks in order to pay for it. And then, yeah, it'll eventually just sort of pare down until it's like, I only want, can I download it? Can I stream it? Like, we're not doing that in the initial stages, but, 3 or 4 years from now, I'm sure that's probably what will happen.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the streaming and downloading and all that, and we all know that musicians don't really get paid the way the record companies do for that. But it's an interesting trend I've seen. Spoke to Terry Draper of Klaatu fame recently, and he just released a new album that has all the extras in it. And I think that's something that we've all missed, boomers anyway. I mean, you remember the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon album and all these Beatles albums, that there was so much in the package beyond just the music. So it's good to see that artists like yourself are doing that, because we, the fans, do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's just a question of how many, like, uh, and it does work if you own your own stuff. Then the shares of it, there's not as many middlemen as there used to be in the music business, and so as artists are getting their own publishing back and owning their own masters and things, it does become easier to do that. And then you don't necessarily need to sell as many in order to be getting your money back for your manufacturing costs and things. But I mean, I'd gone indie around 95, 96 after doing those 3 albums that I just talked about. And I was making my own records, and I never did vinyl. I always just put them out on CD, which is the format that I preferred. I know that there's a romance that exists to vinyl, and I know I'm never going to dispel that, but I always found it so frustrating when we had to be like cutting lacquers, and you couldn't have too much bottom end on the tracks that were going to end up near the end of the spiral, closer to the label, because it would make the needle jump out of the grooves. And so the wider, bit deeper grooves that could have the bottom end had to be at the front of the side, and you can only fit less than 20 minutes aside. And like when I got to CDs, it was like, well, you can fit 72 minutes of music on there, and you know what, there's no noise floor. And I went, no noise floor? That's because, of course, the needle goes down on the vinyl, it goes, and everybody thinks that's a lovely, oh yeah, geez, oh, the hair on my arms is starting to stand up because I'm hearing all of this surface noise. And I go, yeah, I'm not keen on surface noise. I would love to be able to record a flute from across the room with lots of ambience. And I don't want there to be getting in the way of the sound of that flute from across the room. Like, I'm a little bit more of a Steely Dan kind of guy than I am a Deep Purple kind of guy. Now, having said that, I loved Deep Purple back in the day. They were my band for a while.
Richie Blackmore, man.
Oh,
Yeah.
and the like those records on vinyl for me, okay, like you crank it up, let's go.
There were some who were better at the mastering process than others, and at masking that white noise, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
and you had to be careful. The whole thing of lacquering was an art. And you really needed to kind of know your shit in order to be able to EQ it, to max out what you were doing there. And there was always a little bit, you were paying a price. People don't know this, but they would be dialing out the bottom end as you got towards the end of the side, and they would have to be watching levels very carefully and stuff. Whereas CD, if you've recorded it right, man, you can whack it. Like, you listen to those old records, even like I say, a CD that was made from songs that were recorded in the early 70s, and then put on a Michael Bublé record from now and hear it just go blam, it's in your face, it's huge. And you can play those games with Steely Dan records. You can't play those games with, I mean, you can, but it's complicated, man, to try and get heavy rock onto vinyl. Anyways, blah blah. Go ahead.
I get it, man. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had a guy at a local record store tell me that if my stuff was on vinyl, he'd really push it. And I thought, you know how much it costs to press vinyl? That said, I don't want to take up your whole day here, Rick. I know you've got other places to go and people to see and so on. Oh, before I forget, congratulations on recently ringing the bell. Hopefully, we're going to have you around for many years to come to share your stories and your music.
Thank you.
Can we just get you to hold up the book one more time, since it's not going to be mirrored on your
Yeah.
side? Lay it on the line. It's
There's
available wherever you get your good books. This is a good one. Make sure you get it.
Yes. Yeah. ECW Press. Amazon is okay by me. Sure. Go ahead. But in Canada, go to your Indigo store. And if you can't find it, man, tell them, hey, order this in for me. Order 2 or 3 copies. I'd like to get
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this with me, Rick. It's been a real
all right,
pleasure. And until next time, cheers.
all right, buddy. Great.
Oh, and one more thing Rick wanted to talk about before we say goodbye, folks.
Okay. Tommy just said to me when we weren't recording about the St. Regis Hotel in North Bay, and they had Saturday afternoon matinees, which of course, if you were in a band, you didn't really like having to do them. You kind of wanted it to be just like a jam session or something. And I remember trying the reason I will never forget the St. Regis Hotel in North Bay is because I had a black Les Paul, and it was a heavy one. It was a standard, and so I was using it in the thing, and my strap button came undone, and the guitar dropped, and it fell right onto my right big toe, and smashed my right big toe. And then, so for the gig that night, I was like limping around, because of my right foot was badly damaged from a Les Paul dropping from my waist down and crushing it against the stage of the St. Regis Hotel in North Bay. By God.
Oh man,
Anyways, yeah, we're there, eh? You were in the audience.
I was in the audience and I got up and jammed on the matinee whenever I could. And I'll never forget. I used to rock out to Rocky Mountain Way, and
Oh,
I'm pretty sure that somebody in the band was relieved that they didn't have to sing it that day. That said, thanks again, Rick, and until
you're
next time,
okay,
cheers.
Tommy. Take care, man. Bye bye.
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including recording, editing, guest acquisition, etc. And hey, here's some news. We've just recently joined forces with 519 Magazine, so you can check out my interviews there as well. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn, all rights reserved. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help us keep it going, why don't you click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff. We really appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, cheers.